All right, let's begin. Today is October 20th, 2022. My name is Adolfho Romero, and I'm here on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And today we are going to be discussing regarding a specific grant called Challenging Racism at UF. And for this portion of this interview, today I have the pleasure to speak with one of our colleagues at the Samuel Proctor, former SPOPper.
Oh, her name is Lara.
All right, Hennessy's. Thank you for joining us here today. So before I begin, I want to know a little bit about your history. When and where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Bronx. Up until I was 10. My dad was a super, so all this taking out the trash, cleaning the building, all those things is what we did growing up. And then we moved to Miami when I was 10. So I grew up between New York and Miami, so I have family in both places. We go back and forth a lot. Okay. And then my family's from the Dominican Republic, so very Caribbean immigrant culture growing up.
Okay, well, great. So will you say that you're first generation?
Yes, first generation. My mom finished high school in the Dominican Republic. I think my dad, maybe like 3rd or 4th grade. Yeah.
And from their perspective, what was the reason that brought them over here to the U.S.?
My dad's family came because his older brother was involved in the Dominican Revolution, and so their family, they have different stories. They're very Latino, so they had to get out. My dad says it wasn't that serious. My aunt says that it was, but that's how his adult brother got the visa to be able to come, and the U.S. was doing the brain drain policy at the time, so the whole family was able to come. My mom came in the late 80s, and that was more like the economic policies that were hitting DR. So she came, she was supposed to come just for a few years to work, and then she met my dad, and she had a baby, and that was me.
All right, wonderful.
Ended up staying.
And so you were pretty much raised in Florida, right? From what you recall, like as a kid, or?
I think it's both. I always say it's because up until I was 10, it was very much New York, and it was such a really, I grew up a lot. Like the way we grew up, you grew up a lot very quickly, very early. And it's always since I'm in between, because if you talk to people that grew up in Florida, a lot of their markers of a Florida childhood, I don't have those things, because I didn't do my young years here. But my teenage years, it was all here. And we always went back a lot to New York because my dad wasn't able to find work in Miami because we moved during the housing crisis. So he would still stay being a super in New York. So we were just always, so I was always in between both.
Was it a culture shock when you moved from New York to?
Oh yeah, that was very different. I really hated Florida for a long time.
Can you tell me why? What's the reason behind that? What was your experiences on that end with race issues?
Well, I think one is because I just had a lot of family in New York, and we were, grew up in the Bronx. Every time my mom's relatives came from DR, they stayed with us. I had a whole bunch of cousins. We never had a lot of money. We were very broke, but in Miami we were more broke, And my dad was gone all the time, so it was just very different. And then, race is also really different even in Miami as compared to New York. In New York, everybody's either you're Black, Dominican, and Puerto Rican. Mm-hmm. And a lot of Dominicans and Puerto Ricans were all Afro-Latinos.
That's right.
And Miami is way more Cuban, and having to deal with that, especially at that age when you're going through the move, it was very hard. It was just a really tough time. And Miami, I think in New York, you just get used to, you need to go somewhere, you go, you leave, you take the train. And if you don't have a car in Florida, you're stuck. And we couldn't afford a car for a long time. So it was just hard. The racial things, the economic things, and it took us a while to kind of bond a bit with my dad's family there. But then, we're really close. I have really good family on both sides. It just takes a while,
Okay.
I was 10. It was that
of
age.
Course.
It wasn't,
Yeah. I mean, I want to dive into the racial injustices at 10. Probably not as much as, we wouldn't be able to highlight them as much, New York versus Florida. Mm-hmm. But It kind of makes me think about your school experiences. How did it differentiate in New York? I mean, you were younger. Do you remember, like, how were your classmates, your teachers? Were there minorities? Was it whites, blacks? What was it like? Demographics?
I mean, I grew up in the South Bronx. It was black.
Okay.
I mean, most of my teachers, like, you know, it was all black teachers. Like, all my classmates were mostly black or Afro-Dominican. You know, I still have my fourth grade teacher on Facebook, and we write all, like, you know, it was, yeah, it was just very different. And I noticed when I moved to Miami, I moved fifth grade, and my teacher was Jamaican, so she was really cool too. But I do remember we were a little ahead in the curriculum in New York than in Florida, because I remember we were doing things in the fifth grade that we had already done in the fourth and in New York. But it was, you know, I had to make new friends in the fifth grade, and I had to make new friends in the sixth grade when I went to middle school. But my middle school in New York, in Miami, was, you know, it was very Haitian, it was very black, because it was, so it was, like, in that sense, it was fine. It was similar, but it was also different, because I think in New York, where I wouldn't get asked questions so much about your racial background, but we were also in elementary school, you got it a little bit more. And it was because I think the term Afro-Latina wasn't being used that much at the time, you got me? Which now it's just different, even though also the way Dominicans are perceived in the US among black Americans culturally, you know, there's a lot of common ground there in discussion. So, you know, but I think, well, it wasn't even that difficult in school. I would say certain things, it was like for my parents and stuff. And my mom was a cleaning lady, and she's much more darker skin than I am. I remember she had a tough time sometimes, like in her job sometimes, because of, you know, white Cubans, and she was Dominican, and she was darker skin. So
the hierarchy between even jobs, isn't that crazy? Between groups, even the same group, just because of the skin tone.
Yes, and you know, Miami, I love Miami, but Miami is also very divided, you know, depending on your Jamaican, Haitian, Dominican, Cuban, Nicaraguense. Everybody has their block, everybody has their street, you know, and there's a lot of really great things about Miami in terms of Latinos coming together, but there's also really a lot of very difficult things. Especially I didn't know it at the time, but it's very much a city in terms of Latino developed by, like, the Cold War, revolutionary things that happen in Latin America that force people to migrate, you know? So I just didn't know that at the time.
Right. That is so true. Okay, before I keep going with education, I wanted to go back just a little bit back to not your parents, but your great-grandparents or your grandparents. Okay. What do you know about them? What did they do before, or,
My grandparents? My grandpa on my mom's side, he was a pastor in the Dominican Republic, evangelical. So he was in the ministry all his life, and then last 15, 20 years with his second wife, he moved to the US, and he was a pastor here too. Lots of my family, like some of her siblings, half siblings, have all gone into the church and stuff. My grandma was she was a housewife, you know, una ama de casa, but my grandma's amazing. I love her. My grandpa passed away when I was really little, so my abuela, she's the matriarch of the family. Like, she's, you know, we all told her nothing can happen to her. She has to stay around forever. And so that's what she's done her whole life, but she's an amazing craftswoman. Like, all of us have, like, things like decorations, clothes, scarves, things that we all have it in all our houses, because she makes things for all of us. She's really, really talented. On my dad's side, I don't know what his dad did. His mom was a teacher.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so she was a teacher. And then she was a teacher during, I think, the last few years of the Trujillo dictatorship. Oh. So there's, like, family stories about her. But she passed away my second year in college, actually, because I was at SPOP. Okay. I remember when that happened. Oh, wow. So like, education, church, like, those things on the run in my family, I think, on both sides.
Yeah, and that was, I'm trying to understand, like, what were the influence of them on you? Like, what influence, did you get any influence from them that made you who you are today? Like, some traits, characteristics that you say that you take from them or build your character?
I think from my dad's side, because my dad, he ain't getting a lot of schooling, but he's a really, really smart man. And, you know, him and his sister and his brothers and friends were always talking politics. in the house. And even though they wouldn't want me to be there because I was a girl, I would still be there anyways, and I'll be arguing, and they would have to let me stay. And so I think in that sense, it's not a surprise that I chose the career that I have, and because I grew up with it, On my mom's side of the family, because even if you're a pastor, you're still teaching, like the predicando, like that's the way of teaching. So and my dad's family, we also had teachers too. So I think the education runs on both sides. Like that's one of my high school teachers. She was saying, teachers run in the family. Like you never just have one. You always have more than one.
That is correct. I think same thing on my end. So like it's wonderful to see how those connections don't begin like now, but begin before us, our predecessors, and our descendants, I guess our family descendants. But going now back to education, did your parents always push you to, hey, mija, you got to keep going to school, you got to get your BA? Did they even have an understanding of what the BA, PhD even meant at that point, or they just knew you got to keep going, you figure it out type of thing?
My parents was always like, do good in school, because if not, you're gonna get in trouble. I just didn't want to get in trouble. Like, I think obviously in Latin America, your BA, like la licenciatura, means something different than it does here. Like, to be a licenciado there, like it's a really big deal. Whereas here, the BA, at least that doesn't have as much weight. But I think it was mostly, I always wanted to do good in school because I just didn't like being at home. So I would like stay in school doing things, and I got good grades, so my mother wouldn't yell at me. But I liked school. I like being with my friends. I really love to read. So I learned English. I really liked that. And then I think when I got for college, that was really hard, because Latinos were not supposed to leave the family. And I was the first one to go away and leave. And that was really hard on my family. Like it was not easy, but I really wanted to get out of my house. I got the scholarship at UF, FOS, and I left.
See ya.
So it was hard, but I think as I've been older, and especially studying what I've studied, I realized that my mom I was going into a space that she had no understanding of.
Okay.
So it was I think it was protection, but like her way of doing it,
Yeah, a question I have about that experience, leaving the home, leaving behind everything. In a way, at least from what I've seen, a lot of students do leave their parents, but to an extent, there's always that connection that always brings you back. And in your case, I don't know if that's something similar that happened. Like, your parents, something happens, I avoid mom, dad, like, over the weekend, try to fix it for them, or were you really apart from there where it's like, no, they gave you the space for you to get some personal growth and self-development?
No, I am the only daughter. I have two brothers, and I'm the oldest. Okay. So I've always had a lot of responsibility in my family. And so as part of the reason, not probably, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to leave, because it was just a lot. And I still had a lot of that labor to do after I left, and even now that I'm on the other side of the country. But at the same time, I was in Gainesville. It was, a bus ride down to Miami. I also just really love hanging out with my family. They're fun. Everybody that's met them loves them. We're really good party people. We're in the interview, but Deborah and Tamara, like Dr. Ortiz, they love my mom it was my mom and my siblings. Okay. And, so all my friends love my family. We cook really good food. We throw really great parties. Like they're hilarious. So will not be funnier people than my family. So whenever I could go, and I think also once I left, some of that tension, was also evaporated a little. Not that it went away,
right.
But also, you get older, you learn how to handle those things a lot better.
Excellent. So. All right, so now you're leaving, your home, somewhere where it's very special. You go to a new environment. I'm guessing it must have been a bit of a culture shock from Miami coming to UF.
Oh yeah, it was.
Tell me.
It was the first time I realized that football is a really big deal in this country. And going to UF. I mean, on the one hand, I was really happy, because it was you're away. It was like a new space, and so that. Like I was taking classes that I really liked, like the people that I was meeting, friends. Like it was cool. But it was, Gainesville is really the South. And I think it was really hard at first. It was just things, because I was like 18. It's like I didn't realize until I moved there that I had an accent, because I never talked, to white people pointed out, or there would be, what was that? I got a lot like, well, you look black, but you speak Mexican. And so like they could not comprehend, or like most people thought that I was like, that I had a black parent and a white parent because of how I looked. And then, like when I go to DR, I get called mulata a lot, you know, so it's like, I understand why they would say that in Gainesville, but it's like, you look like this, but you speak Spanish, we do not comprehend these things. And I think it was really hard at first to try to navigate that. Then, you know, you kind of mess with people a little sometimes. But at first I didn't know how to do that. I think as I got more involved at UF, I think what was really striking, I always grew up, you know, very, 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 very working class, no money family. But I think I always lived among, you know, you live among your people, so you all know you're broke and you understand the system, but it was a very different level of understanding that when I got to UF, especially once I got more involved and you start learning about things like, you know, Florida Blue Key and how a lot of those people there end up going into the Florida legislature. And I think you start realizing, you know, we're at the same university, but we have gotten here in two very different ways. And even though we're at the same place, they're at a very different level than I am. And I'll never be able to get to that level in those ways because it's impossible, you know? And I think having to understand, like, that really hit me, I think, once I started getting more involved in activities and things at UF.
Okay. Were there ever any microaggressions or prejudice or racism that you faced at UF directly or indirectly while you were there?
I mean, well, yeah, all the time. Like, we get it. It's just, I mean, you get it. I think it's sometimes like I was, try to see like what to say and not to say.
This is a safe space. Feel free to say it.
I was a history major, so you know, it's things like where people saying, well, if you're going to do Latin America, you can. What was the person that said? I think when I was doing my senior thesis, there were people saying, oh, if you're going to do Latin America, you can work with a person that worked on like the Aztec Empire, and I worked on the modern. I'm like, these are two completely different things. Or you being in class and like a professor that ostensibly supposed to be an expert on French history doesn't know anything about the Haitian Revolution, you know? And so one, it's like you're just not being seen at all in the classes. I think in terms of probably microaggressions and direct, I think we dealt a lot with that, at least with my friends. Those that were really involved in student activities, in dealing with like administrators, trying to get more funding for the Latino student organizations like that, because we all knew why we weren't getting as much funding or as much attention. And so those things I think were really hard. So things that you might, obviously there's racism that you get when you go out in the street and the things that you hear and say when people look at you. But then dealing with the administration at UF and those kinds of things were extremely different.
Okay, great answer. It seems like you had your own experiences at UF and facing all those challenges. How did you find space to kind of reflect back and create some solidarity between you and the others? Did you have like a group of friends? Did you have like la casita? Or what did you do to kind of like, you know, like put yourself in a positive light or just thought, if that makes sense?
I mean, I don't know if they still do this at UF, but a lot of us that were coming in, like minority students, we had to do that summer B program before you start your first year. And even though there's probably all these reasons for that, that was really good because I met a really good group of friends there, that we stayed friends like till now. In terms of student activities, I think the first thing I joined when I was there that summer was the Dominican Student Association. And so that, you know, was just people, you know, we could like talk about how you couldn't get any Dominican food in Gainesville. You know, we would like just social stuff. We went out, we had fun. In terms of solidarity, then that's when I started getting more involved. You know, you go to La Casita, the IBC. I was very involved with Hispanic Heritage Month because I ran it. What year did I run it? 2013, yeah. And then a lot of also what really helped was also being at SPOP. And then the things that I did, like my friends that I had that we were in the history program, but we were doing like Haitian history, Dominican history, just, you know, non-white history. So I always had my different pockets and different spaces depending on what I needed, but I always had really good friends and really good, you know, mentors at UF.
What brought you to SPOP? How did you find out about SPOP? Who told you about it?
I was just talking to Deborah about this earlier. I do not remember.
Okay.
I don't know
Fair
if
enough.
somebody, I don't know if it was through FOS that they mentioned Dr. Ortiz, but I think I was sending her for classes, and they mentioned the internship program at SPOP, and I was like, this sounds really cool, and so that's how I signed up. And it was spring semester, my sophomore year.
Okay, your sophomore year. So you were pretty much, you were still sort of new at the
Yeah.
campus. So I feel like SPOP gives the opportunity to learn more about the community that you're around, like what's happening at UF. And through that, you're able to work, like you said, you had different networks throughout the university that you're able to grab and pull. And I want to talk a little bit about those networks. What were those organizations, clubs that you would join, like you were mentioning right now? Which other organizations were you part of during your time there?
It was, the Dominican Student Association, definitely Hispanic Heritage Month, which is part of the Hispanic Student Association. I don't know if they changed the name, but HSA. But what I was really most involved was HHM, because I started out my sophomore year, and I went up to the executive director, and that's a really big job at UF to have that. And at the oral history program, I started as an intern, and then I started transcribing, and then I think my last year, around the time I was graduating, then I started doing the Latina Diaspora and the Americas project there. And I worked on that project the year after I graduated. What other organizations was I a part of? Maybe other things, but those are the ones that I remember. And, well, at least those are the ones that meant the most to me.
Yeah,
those are the ones
absolutely.
that I gave my all to those.
Of course. During your time at UF, did you guys protest against administration, faculty about certain issues, specific situations related to racism or challenging racism?
A lot of what I was a part of was trying us to get ethnic studies at UF. So that was a really big push. I don't know where things stand right now because I'm not that familiar. But that was actually one of the big things that really honestly helped launch LDAP at SPOP, is that course that we had. And to be honest, that course was just supposed to be like a reading club with some of the students. Because I had just graduated, so a lot of my friends were still finishing up. And they're like, no, we want a class that talks about Latinx because we don't have a lot of it. And you did have people that were teaching Latino studies. You had Efrain Barradas. Oh my God, what was the other professor's name? She was really great. She's in the Latin American Studies program.
She just retired too,
Efrain. There was a female professor that did a lot of really amazing work there as well. I can't remember.
Resende?
Yes.
Rosana Resende.
Yes,
Dr.
Rosana Resende.
Oh, that's amazing. Lovely.
She's incredible.
Agreed.
So students wanted more, and so they wanted that class, and I asked Dr. Ortiz, and I developed the syllabus, and we did that class, and it was to this day one of the most important things I've done in my life. But it was the students that wanted that class, and we used that to try to advocate for more ethnic studies on campus, and we were trying to get funding and do all these different kinds of things. But UF is UF, and interesting, when Jocelyn Padron was running to be the first Latina student government president at UF. Her and Liana, that were running that campaign, they were in my class. So the things that we were teaching and covering in my class, they were using all of those tactics to organize their campaign. And they won. Jocelyn was the first Latina president of student government.
That's a wonderful win right there, period. A Latina woman on top, and
And here, I never did student government because I had, a lot of issues with all of that stuff at UF, and it's just not where I wanted to spend my energies. But they were my friends, they were my students, and so we spent a lot of time and energy trying to help them because it was important to do that. So that, I think, trying to push for ethnic studies, and I think we did a lot in trying to get funding. I think a lot of the activism students were doing around that time too is get more funding for undocumented students on campus. I think this is some of the, when Liana Guerra was working, started working in Tallahassee, is a lot of what she was doing there at the start. So, and then we had Dr. Castillo that was running La Casita, so they did a lot of organizing around the Immokalee workers, and Chispa was doing a lot of that work as well. So there is a really good group of students doing a lot of really great organizing work.
It
at
seems,
the time.
It seems like all of this was happening around the same time, so it's like a lot of Latinidad happening in different spaces, community coming together. Do you feel like you were like an important link between all those groups to kind of like send out the information? How did you guys did you collaborate with all of them, like to a degree, know what's going on, kind of gather together as a group and talk about what's going on? What are you guys working on? How can we help you? Or
so I really don't want to put myself at the center of anything, because I think people were doing a lot of really good work at the time. I think one of the things I did learn, like especially working with Dr. Ortiz, is that, and SPOP, is you always want to center community. And so I do realize when I ran Hispanic Heritage Month, and it was like I was a Latina student leader on campus. One of the things that I really did try to do was make more space for us as students to do more organizing and at least helping out more with Latinos and Gays community overall. So I think in that sense, and trying to serve as a bridge, that is one of the things that I really tried to do while I was at UF, And it did help that, I knew the librarians at Smathers really well. I knew Vicky, that was doing the Latina Women's League. I knew Dr. Castillo, and so also JC Solis was working there. We all got along, and even though we all had things that we were really, really passionate about, I think we tried to converge where we could to help one another out. And so that was really important to us at the time. I think the other thing that I really tried to do was find out a lot more about the history of Latino students at UF, because that's when Dr. Castillo and Natalia Ochoa, who was, I think, the grad student for La Casita at the time, they were trying to do, it was the 20th anniversary of La Casita, and they were doing interviews about the founding of it. And through that, and I think it was Richard who was in charge of the Smathers collection at the time, that I found out, that Vanessa Carlo Miranda was one of the founders of La Casita. We were able to bring her out for Hispanic Heritage Month to interview her. So we were trying to piece together that history to show how long we've been here and what we were trying to do for the, a lot of the things we were trying to do when I was there was a lot of the work students were trying to do in the 90s, and we were just building on it. But that history has been so fragmented. And I'm sure that is a lot of this work that students are trying to do now. I know when I left, there was a lot of organizing and trying to save La Casita and save the IBC, And they use a lot of those oral histories at our SPOP to, show the importance of these houses. So I think as students, we've all tried to come together, and I think we've all done a really good job of that. We've also tried to build our own history at the university, because it's not a recognition that UF gives to us at all. So I think as students, it's been, I think, imperative to write our own history, show what we've done for that university, and that any achievement that's been done by students of color there, it hasn't been because the university has said, well, here, let me help you. It's been students fighting for every single little thing that they've gotten, and building that community on campus.
Excellent. Yeah, I completely agree with that. What do you think the administration could do on their end to help out? Because a lot of this, it seems, it has been students, maybe some staff members that really are passionate about the work that they're doing. But how can we get administration, UF faculty that are at the upper levels, board of trustees, or those levels that are so disconnected from the student body, and even just ethnicity, race, almost non-existent to them. It's just we're almost like numbers, and that's it.
I mean, I know at least when I was there, and then I know with the NREC event, we've always had staff members and faculty, and even some administrators that haven't really dedicated to helping, and they have served as allies that students have been able to use, because obviously faculty of color want more students of color, and everybody's been asking for a lot of the same things, and allies as well. I think it's hard for me to comment on what the administrators can do now, because I'm not at UF anymore, and I haven't been there for a long time. However, following the news of all the things that are happening in the state of Florida and at UF, I think it's a really tough challenge. I think if the university is going to follow these things of, they don't want critical race theory. We want the syllabi of all our faculty. If we're going to go into this phase and, with the person that they just nominated for university president, it doesn't seem like the board of trustees and those people on that level are on the side of, students, or even faculty at this point that are trying to change things and push back and, fighting for equality and justice on campus. you know? So, but they're gonna have to decide, like, if UF really wants to be this top 10 institution that they say that they wanna do, like, are we gonna be a top 10 in a space where we're gonna be against equality and justice and protecting, you know, civil liberties, or we're gonna attack them? Like, what's UF's message gonna be? Because right now they're very conflicting. Actually, not even conflicting. The things that they're doing are very clear in what they wanna do and what they wanna say. So, I think they have a path to choose in terms of, you know, moving forward.
Okay. Now I want to move a little bit to the current grant that we're sort of working on. It's challenging racism at UF. What are some maybe suggestions that you would say that we could probably use, or tactics to combat racism at the university? And this, it doesn't have to be UF, just at any institution, just overall, what can we do to prepare ourselves to kind of, you know, if we want to challenge it, what do we have to do?
Oh, that's a really big question. I think what a lot of obviously universities are trying to do is bring in more students and obviously more faculty of color. And obviously that speak to different like racial, gender, perspective, sexuality. And I always think those things are really important, but it's also, if we're gonna bring them in, well then what are gonna be the mechanisms to support them, to be able to have people, you know, be supported in every way financially, in terms of mental health, that all these systems of support are there, that, you know, we're not just saying we want you, but we're gonna fight to have you here, and see that reflected in the curriculum, in the administrators, right, all across the board. And then a big thing, especially, you know, looking at the political climate right now, looking at inflation, like all the things that are happening in this country right now, I think, you know, that wall that there is between the university and the community in a lot of different spaces really has to come down, because, you know, all of us that are, especially people that are coming in that are first gen and we're, you know, different racial backgrounds, the ties to where we come from are really strong. That's not gonna go away. So, like, what are we gonna do to kind of bridge that divide? Because, you know, like, being silent is not gonna really work. It hasn't ever worked, but it's not really gonna work moving into the future.
Okay, I have a question here. What does it mean to be an ally? Like, if you're an administrator or even a student leader, what does an ally mean?
That's another really big question. I think an ally, you know, it's been interesting. We're talking a little bit about that with some of my colleagues. I think in certain spaces, it's knowing like what your role is in a given situation. Sometimes it is to speak up, right? And if something that's being done wrong, you have to really address it. Knowing that you can speak for one community, but you can't speak for others. A lot of times it's also, you know what, let me shut up and find you the money and give you the money so you can go and do this work that needs to be done, you know? So I think it just depends like on the situation. And you also have to be willing to constantly be doing difficult work and educating yourself, right? And putting yourself in uncomfortable situations so you can learn and grow, because none of us, you know, are perfect.
Not at all. Great answer on that, for sure. So tell me, now that you've graduated, you graduated UF and then you went for your PhD, and you just recently graduated, so congratulations on that again. How was that experience during your PhD, being a Latina woman and, you know, not being at UF, but being at another institution? Did you feel like there's similarities or differences when it comes to challenging racism, or feeling comfortable, feeling like a space, this is an institution that really does care for me? Do you feel like those institutions have given you that, or you kind of battled it through yourself?
That's really, you know, because I had a different experience, and at UC Davis is really different. There's a different culture in the UCs. Okay. In certain ways regarding education, and there, you know, sometimes at UF it's education, but there's football, you know, and so but it was still a PWI, you get me? And I think even though like there is racism in Gainesville, at least Gainesville, you were still in the South. You were still closer to certain things culturally, whereas, you know, coming to California was also, especially Davis, was a really big culture shock for me. You know, it was also very white, and if you found Latino people, they were very, you know, they were Mexican, which is not a bad thing. But it was just very, you know, it was hard for me to find my space because I'm not Mexican, so it's like how to find my group, the people, you know, that I can feel at home with, you know. And thank God, like, you know, we had the Black Grad Student Association, because we had, you know, a lot of people that were either from Nigeria or from the Caribbean. And in certain ways, you know, I might have more in common with a person that's like from Jamaica than from Mexico, you know? So like I hung out with a lot of people that were from Mexico, that were from all over, you know, depending on what it is that, you know, you're feeling community-wise or what you need at the moment. In terms of the institution, I always said like I had a really great dissertation committee. Like I had like a really people that were there advocating for me. I had really good friends. But it was just hard. Like you're you know, it's Afro Latina, you're first, and I was very, very far away from home. You know, like just the flight to had money back to fly back home was a lot of money. I couldn't go home as much as I was used to. And the big thing is honestly, it's like it's funding. It's like it's supporting more like students of color in terms of mental health. But it's like funding. You know, like it was really hard to find money to to finish my degree. And this is I like in terms of other friends that I know that are in grad school, I had it better off in terms of my funding. But it's hard, like having to ask for money, having to, you know, say why your work matters because people don't think that it matters. You know, it was just, it's extremely, extremely hard. You know, even sometimes, you know, in your discipline, like, you know, obviously my degree was in history, but my emphasis was in African diaspora studies, and having to sometimes merge those two was very difficult. It was just, you know, it was just hard. Like it was extremely, extremely hard. And it took me a while to like find like my space, like my community at Davis, because it was a culture shock in a very different kind of way.
Okay, were your committee members, were they minorities or were they all ranged?
At the end, because like obviously, you know, I have 5 people when you're doing my exams and my defense, but at the end I have my all-woman committee that I'm very proud of. It's very badass.
Okay, cool.
My chair was Marian, she's white, and then Bettina's she's from Kenya, black, and then Lorena, that was Chicana.
Beautiful, love it.
So, but they're extremely, extremely amazing group of women, and like I couldn't have finished without them. And then I also had really good mentors outside of Davis in different institutions, you know, that, you know, like the scholars that work in Dominican studies are so great, you know. So it's just, I can't complain in terms of mentorship. I got really good mentorship, but I had to find it, right? It wasn't, but part of it's also not even, you know, I was doing Caribbean studies in the STEM school in California. So, you know, the Caribbean is not what they do there. So obviously I had to find it, you know, and my committee helped where they could as well. But it was just, you know, it's just different.
Yeah, I think that matters at any institution, period. Even you have, like, how do you find those resources, places, who to talk to, who not to talk to? Well, not who talk to, but definitely like where do I outreach the person that I need to communicate my message, whether it's like making a thesis, whatever it may be. Who tells you that, you know? And that's how you kind of like, I feel like you effectively find somebody that's really wants to help you, you know. But I feel like it's instructors and faculty members, that's their job, that's why they're there for, I want to say, you know. But I mean, obviously sometimes it's not as easy to get those resources, but you have to go out there and look for them.
You should. I mean, it's a friend and I were actually talking a little bit the other day about this whole thing, you know, when some professors say that, well, because I had it really hard, you need to have it really hard, and like why those things are so problematic, you know. And I think, because I went to go do my PhD and I didn't have a master's, but there were certain things that I had to learn that I didn't understand what I didn't know, I think, until the end. I was like, oh, but would have done the master's, I can see how that would have helped in certain things. But a lot of the things we all talked about, especially a lot of the first-gen students in my program, was, you know, sometimes like the extra help that we needed in terms of like the writing, you know, if English is not your first language, you know, or just, you know, like when you start writing a dissertation, you're like, how do I write this? Like, how do you write a dissertation? I don't know what this is, you know, and so many things you're trying to figure it out on your own. And, you know, like, what is your writing rhythm? How do you write? Like, all these things that I didn't have a clue about, that we had to figure it out. Or even, you know, once you start going to conferences and you have to network, how do you network? You know, how do you do all these things, you know? I had to meet contacts and meet people in my field, and, you know, trying to find all these things. So, but you know, I had professors that were so kind and really helped me out to this day, you know, and they put me in contact with people, and they're just, you know, it's like people that they're so great that you know that they're in your life for a reason. Like, they were there to help you, and you hope that like seeing all that they've done for me is like the things that I want to give back to my students, you know?
And that was almost close to my last question. Now that you're done and you're going to become an instructor, right? What type of instructor do you want to be? Do you see yourself now that you've gone through a lot of things, you've seen a lot? Now, how do you see yourself?
I mean, I always hope that I can be like a support system for my students when and where they need it. And I always say with my students, I always tell them, my goal is at the end of this class that you've learned to ask difficult questions or different kind of questions. I don't really care that you have the answer for everything, but as long as you can ask a good question, that can take you really far, to question the way things are, to question what's being given to you, and to fight to find the answers to those questions, is what I always have to hope to build in my classrooms, So that, to be a really great teacher, and then obviously my research, in research that, hopefully, helps contributes even a little bit to the questions that all of us, are trying to work to, and, to keep doing a lot of work, especially with my students and then my research, that is more collaborative, because I know a lot of what we do as historians or scholars is very independent, at least in social sciences, but to help to do more things that, that are collaborative, because I think that does make a big difference.
Okay. Well, with that said, I think I'm about to conclude the interview, but before we conclude, is there any last message or anything that you want to leave behind to the next generation that are listening, that is going to be listening to this video? And that means like even, in regards to the grant, not lose hope, whatever it may be, what message would you send out to the students right now that are going through their BAs, MAs, PhDs? What would you tell them? If you could share with them.
Oh, that's really big. The thing is, right, what students are going through now, it's in certain ways is so different than the things that I went through when I was a student at UF, right? So like the political climate is so different. But one of the things that's always, like when things were even really bad at UF, hold on really close to the friends that you have in the community that you've built, because I think that's so important. Like, and those are friends I can say now that I've been at UF for a while that I still have in my life, and that's extremely important. In terms of trying to fight for change and things that are different, one of the things that's always inspired me and give me hope is all the things that students at UF have fought for, like 50s, 60s, earlier on to this day. And seeing these stories, I mean, it's infuriating that we still have to fight for things, and that we shouldn't have to. But at least it's gratifying to know that we're not alone. Right. So I think that, I don't know if it's optimistic or not, but I will say the best thing about a lot of what we do is the community that we build, and nobody can take that away from you, no one.
All right, Genesis. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, great pleasure meeting you in person and talking to you. So with that, we will conclude this interview. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.